All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a question that I think a lot of people have probably wondered. How did Venezuela, a nation that was once just overflowing with oil wealth, end up in the economic situation that it's in?
Yeah.
Um, we're going to be focusing on the years leading up to Maduro's presidency in 2013
All right.
and using this really insightful YouTube video from Economy as our guide. Get ready for some eye-opening revelations.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this whole story is how it's not just about Venezuela, It's
Right.
sort of like a cautionary tale for any nation that's reliant on a single resource and,
Right.
all the political and economic choices that
Yeah,
can really make or break a country's future.
absolutely. So let's rewind the clock back to the 1970s,
And
a time that's often dubbed Venezuela's golden age of oil.
yeah.
What was life actually like during this boom? Was it truly as prosperous as it's often portrayed?
Imagine a country where oil money seems to solve everything. That's kind of what it was like. Venezuela was just riding high on, like, skyrocketing oil prices.
Yeah.
And for many, life was good.
Okay.
The government was just pouring that oil revenue into social programs, leading to higher wages and subsidized services. It felt like the party would never end.
But was this reliance on oil, even during those good times, setting the stage for problems down the road?
Well, that's the big question. This period also birthed a phenomenon that economists call Dutch disease,
Okay.
where you focus heavily on one booming export,
Right.
and it can actually harm other industries. So in Venezuela's case, you had agriculture and manufacturing getting neglected,
Ah, okay.
which left the economy dangerously dependent on oil.
So even during this golden age, the seeds of vulnerability were being sown.
Exactly.
Then comes the 1980s oil crisis, the moment the music stopped. What happened when this economic shockwave hit?
It was a brutal reality check for Venezuela. Global oil prices just crashed, sending the Venezuelan economy into a tailspin. It's like, imagine a family that's used to this lavish lifestyle, and suddenly their income is slashed.
Right.
That's what it felt like. Debt piled up, the currency just plummeted in value,
Wow.
and social unrest, started to simmer. And get this, between 1986 and 1996, the homicide rate surged a staggering 418%.
That's a chilling statistic. It's amidst this turmoil
Yeah.
that a charismatic figure emerges, Hugo Chavez.
Right.
He's already attempted a coup in 1992, right?
That's right. And what's paradoxical is that this failed coup actually boosted Chavez's popularity.
Really?
Yeah, he became this symbol of defiance against the political establishment
Right.
that many Venezuelans saw as corrupt and just out of touch with their struggles.
So he had this outsider appeal, a man of the people.
Exactly.
And in 1998, he rode that wave of discontent all the way to the presidency. What exactly did he promise to do to fix the economy?
Well, Chavez, he campaigned on this populist platform, pledging to undo privatizations, increase social spending, and nationalize key industries. He tapped into this deep frustration that a lot of Venezuelans felt
Yeah.
and promised them a more equitable share of the nation's wealth.
Okay, so it sounds like he was offering like a radical shift, a complete break from the past.
Right.
But what about his actual economic strategy?
Well, this is where things get particularly interesting.
Okay.
One of his key tactics was actually attempting to raise oil prices by reducing Venezuela's oil production.
Wait, wouldn't that decrease their income, at least in the short term? That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is. And there's actually like a really flawed logic behind it. The idea was based on the principle of supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
Reduce the supply of oil and the price should go up.
Yeah.
But it oversimplified things.
Yep.
It ignored factors like global market dynamics and Venezuela's own production capacity. And the move, it really spooked investors, which
Right.
triggered capital flight.
So basically, people pulling their money out of the country because they don't have confidence?
Exactly. Because they lacked confidence in Chavez's policies.
So it was a gamble that backfired.
Precisely. And to make matters worse, government spending on social programs just continued to balloon.
Oh, wow.
So you have this combination of reduced oil revenue, increased spending,
Yep.
creating a perfect storm for economic instability.
So even with Chavez at the helm,
Mm.
the deep-rooted issues weren't being addressed.
Right.
They were arguably getting worse.
Yeah.
Were there any points where things seemed to be improving?
There was this brief period in the early 2000s
Okay.
where rising global oil prices
Yeah.
created this illusion of progress.
Okay.
The economy saw some growth,
Okay.
and Chavez's popularity soared.
So it was a bit of good fortune that masked the underlying problems for a little while.
Exactly. But it also allowed Chavez to further consolidate his power
Yeah.
and advance his, socialist agenda. He gained tighter control over state institutions,
Right.
and concerns about democratic backsliding began to emerge. This is where you start to see the warning signs flashing.
Yeah. Things are definitely taking a darker turn. And then come the late 2000s and Chavez's wave of nationalizations.
Right.
Which sectors did he target, and what were the real-world consequences?
He nationalized a sweeping range of industries: electricity, cement, telecommunications, arguing this was necessary to wrest control from, foreign corporations and to distribute wealth more equitably.
So doubling down on the socialist vision.
Exactly.
But did these nationalizations deliver the promised benefits?
Not at all.
No.
In reality, instead of increasing efficiency and production like they promised, it led to the opposite.
Okay.
Production declined, shortages became widespread, and skilled workers fled the country, along with foreign investors who just lost faith in Venezuela's economic future.
Yeah, the video highlights some shocking examples like the 2011 electricity rationing and international airlines halting operations because of billions in unpaid government debts. These really paint a stark picture of how these policies impacted everyday Venezuelans.
Exactly. People face power outages, shortages of basic goods, and just a steady decline in their standard of living. The cracks were becoming impossible to ignore, even during Chavez's rule.
It seems like the stage was set for even greater turmoil to come.
Absolutely. By the late 2000s, Venezuela was in a full-blown economic crisis.
Wow.
Inflation was spiraling out of control, officially at 30%, but likely much higher in reality.
Okay.
The gap between the official exchange rate and the black market rate widened dramatically. Essentially, the currency was rapidly losing value.
This is sounding eerily familiar to, economic collapses we've seen in other countries like Argentina.
Yeah, the parallels are striking.
Yeah.
Despite these escalating problems, Chavez won re-election in 2012.
Wow.
But his health was failing. His death shortly after paved the way for his chosen successor, Nicolas Maduro.
And that, dear listener, is where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive into Venezuela's economic roller coaster.
Right.
The story continues, and the most turbulent chapter is yet to come.
Exactly. So, we left off with Maduro stepping into Chavez's shoes, inheriting an economy already, teetering on the brink.
Right.
But instead of changing course, he doubled down on Chavez's policies.
And from what I've gathered, Maduro's approach to governing seems, even more authoritarian than his predecessors.
Right.
Further eroding those democratic norms and cracking down on any opposition. That couldn't help the situation, could it?
Not at all. A repressive political climate very rarely fosters economic growth.
Right.
And while under Maduro, the situation spiraled from bad to worse, and at an alarming pace.
Yeah, let's talk about hyperinflation, because that's what Venezuela has become tragically known for.
Right.
The numbers are just staggering.
It's hard to even grasp the concept.
Yeah.
Imagine walking into a store and seeing prices double, triple, even increase tenfold in a matter of days.
Really?
That's the reality Venezuelans faced.
Wow.
In 2018, the official inflation rate exceeded a mind-blowing 1,000%.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
That's just unfathomable.
Yeah.
What does that even look like in everyday life? How do people even function?
It means life savings vanish into thin air. Wages become practically worthless.
Wow.
The daily struggle to just afford basic necessities becomes all-consuming. People are forced to barter or to use foreign currencies or even resort to the black market just to survive.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And as we know, it's always the most vulnerable who bear the brunt of such a catastrophic economic collapse.
Absolutely. We saw widespread shortages of food and medicine, breakdown of essential services, and just this mass exodus of people fleeing the country.
Yeah.
It created a refugee crisis of immense proportions.
It's crucial to remember that this wasn't some natural disaster.
No.
This was a man-made economic crisis, the consequence of years of mismanagement, corruption, and clinging to policies that were clearly not working.
It's a very stark illustration of how ideology and political ambition, when divorced from sound economic principles, can lead to utter devastation for a nation and its people.
But I understand Maduro has disputed these claims,
Yeah.
placing the blame on the U.S. and other external forces for Venezuela's economic woes.
Yeah, blaming sanctions and outside pressure has been a consistent theme in his messaging. However, many economists argue that while sanctions may have exacerbated the situation, The root causes lie in decades of economic mismanagement. The over-reliance on oil and the failure to diversify the economy are key factors.
So it's a complex picture,
Yeah.
with multiple forces at play.
Right.
But what's undeniable is the immense human cost of this crisis.
Absolutely. Millions of Venezuelans have been displaced, their lives uprooted, and the country's still grappling with the long-term consequences of this economic and political turmoil, a legacy that will likely take generations to overcome.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of this tragedy.
Yeah.
What can we as individuals, even those of us outside of Venezuela, even do? It all seems so distant and intractable.
Well, for starters, we need to stay informed. We need to understand the complexities of the situation
Right.
and move beyond simplistic narratives. We can support organizations providing humanitarian aid to Venezuelans both inside and outside the country. And we can use our voices to advocate for peaceful solutions and a return to democratic principles in Venezuela. Change often starts with awareness and a willingness to engage.
This deep dive has truly opened my eyes to the human side of this crisis. Beyond just the headlines and the economic statistics, it's a stark reminder of the importance of economic stability, responsible governance, and the fragility of democracy.
Absolutely. It also raises a crucial question. What lessons can we learn from Venezuela's experience? How can we prevent similar situations from unfolding in other parts of the world?
Right.
Are there warning signs we should be paying attention to, both in our own countries and globally?
Those are questions we all need to contemplate, especially as we navigate an increasingly interconnected and volatile global landscape. But that, dear listener, is a deep dive for another day.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up our deep dive into Venezuela's economic roller coaster, it really hits home that this isn't just about numbers on a chart.
No.
It's about real people. Their lives just totally upended by forces beyond their control.
It's a stark reminder that economic instability has a ripple effect far beyond a country's borders. It creates social and political turmoil that can impact entire regions.
And the Venezuelan crisis has triggered a massive refugee crisis, straining resources in neighboring countries.
Yeah.
And, it's also sent shockwaves through global energy markets. It reminds us just how interconnected our world really is.
It's a sobering lesson in the importance of sustainable development and diversifying economies.
Right.
Relying too heavily on a single resource, as Venezuela did with oil, creates a very precarious situation, one that's vulnerable to global shifts.
This deep dive has made me think about the fragility of democracy, too. When economic hardship takes hold, it can erode trust in institutions, which creates fertile ground for authoritarianism to take root.
And that's a critical point. Venezuela's story underscores that economic stability and democratic principles are very often intertwined.
Yeah.
When one falters, the other becomes vulnerable.
So what can we take away from all this? What lessons can we apply to our own lives and the choices that we make as citizens?
Perhaps the most important takeaway is the need for informed engagement. We need to understand the complexities of global issues and how they impact us all, even those seemingly far removed from a particular crisis.
This deep dive has certainly challenged me to look beyond the headlines and grapple with those deeper forces that are shaping our world.
And hopefully it's inspired our listeners to do the same. By understanding the mistakes of the past, we can hopefully chart a more informed course for the future.
Well said. A huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into Venezuela's complex and often heartbreaking journey. We hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and a desire to keep exploring the world around us. Until next time.